today's VOD. Alright guys, hey, what's happening? We are going to be going over a new blue post from the Balance Team developers. Just going to be doing a first impressions. I have not read this post at all, so you guys can read along with me. And we can just kind of take a look at it. People have pointed out this is, oops. Oh, right. Just got the edge of the screen's wet. That's cool. So here we go, guys. Balance Team Dev says, hey everyone. Since our last update, we've been closely monitoring balance stats on the ladder, as well as carefully observing the tournament scene. Today's update will focus on what we're hearing from the community. We'll also share our thoughts on the current matchups. In terms of tournaments, a number of our balance patches, like the Raven changes, and the moving of Ventral Sax to Lair Tech occurred after the qualifier phases or during the later rounds of GSL. So we feel some of these changes haven't quite seen enough high-level play to really judge their ramifications yet. The upcoming GSL group stages and WCS qualifying results will be valuable for gauging where the current meta is and what sort of further balance changes are necessary. Alright, let's talk about the matchups. PvZ. In terms of this matchup, players seem to still be trying out new strategies. Stargate remains a popular opener, but creating and refining new openers often takes some time. Since many players don't want to risk their tournament series on builds they consider untested, E-Trace trades off in power at different points of the game, while still having access to strong, aggressive options should players choose to invest in them. So basically, what they're saying here is, look, the drop tech, you know, there's been a little bit of people trying other builds. Mostly they're still playing Stargate, and the whole point with moving drop tech to lair, rather than it just being an evolution chamber to unlock, now it's just, once your lair's done, you can turn any overlord into a dropper lord, was to just stop all these all-ins where the Zergs dropping Zerglings in two places while flooding the front, and it was very hard for Protoss to hold off, and Protoss players, especially at pro level, felt like they had to open Stargate to be safe against these. And even then, they'd still die sometimes. So now the whole point of moving that was, okay, Protoss players are meant to use more different openings. Personally, I've been doing Archon drops again. I've been loving it. Been enjoying going back to one of my favorite openings. I might mix in the Glaive Adept opening again. Try out some different things, which won't be as vulnerable now that there's not random, very fast Zergling drops in the main. So basically they're saying, look, we haven't really seen any change in pro play. Let's give it some time. Fair enough. I'm totally behind them on that. Terran vs Zerg. We feel this matchup is in a decent state. Both sides have access to several openers and mid-game strategies that reward good play, though we have been getting feedback about late-game Ravens encouraging overly defensive play. While we don't see this style of play all that frequently, we do think the Ravens anti-armor missile provides too much defensive power with its ability to trade energy for high burst damage. Win rates overall slightly favor Zerg in this matchup, so we want to be cautious about changes here. We want to focus more on Terran's mid-game power that scales into the late game. Increasing options for a race in the mid-game can also improve their late game through having greater control over the pacing of the game. It's a very good point. I totally agree with this. Don't know what they're going to do, though. Mid-game options can also encourage more counterplay, as options in the late game usually trend towards closing out the match rather than providing control over transitioning. Ongoing results from GSL and WCS will better inform our decisions, and we do have to be careful overall, as this matchup seems to be trending in a good direction. Okay, so I think there's going to be a lot of Terrans who are obviously, I think they do find the mid-game still kind of very tough, right? Dealing with Banelings and creep spread and all that sort of stuff, and you know, how do you strengthen the mid-game for Terran? Well, I guess creep isn't as much of a problem for mech. It's still a problem. But I think creep might be something that should be addressed. We could have maybe nerf creep a little bit. What do you guys think? Shout out some suggestions. Let's have a little theory crafting chat. Now, whenever I do one of these videos, especially if you're watching on YouTube and I can't interact with you right now, there's always someone who's like, Pig, how fucking dare you say that this thing is all right? And often I'm just sitting here and it's a first impressions video. I haven't fully thought through things, and I always go back and look at my comments and I'm like, what are people angry at me for? I'm like analyzing both sides of what could be good or bad with something. And there's always someone who wants to get really angry and accusatory as if I'm trying to take away their ladder points. So before you comment in chat or in the YouTube comments, how about we just take a deep breath and let's just theory craft together, guys. Wow, there's some really weird comments in chat. So basically, I think Zerg vs Terran and Terran vs Zerg, I agree that overall it's in a good spot. The thing which players are probably having issues with is bio really does struggle on creep, and if creep gets out of control, that seems to be one of the big kind of things. You know, it's weird because sometimes I always go back to this like creep spread in TVZ with how explosive Legacy of the Void is with economy and everything going up. I kind of feel like maybe creep is something which should be looked at. Now, Rotterdam has a really cool idea he's been talking about for years, where he said we should take vision away from creep spread, or at least make it so each creep tumor only sees like a tiny bit of vision, like a burrowed Zergling. Because at the moment, if you get enough creep out, not only does it give you just in like this area where you can get such a boost with any engagement, your army moves so much faster, it's so scary for your opponent to push on, but it also gives you the map hacks, it gives you the vision in those areas, right? So it's definitely something where games can seesaw very hard, and I think that's what Terrans struggle with, is sometimes they like get in a rhythm, they're doing their build, and then they play a Zerg who somehow finds a way to get his creep out just that little bit further earlier. They start clearing creep in one path, by the time they rotate back, the creep is like expanded, and it's just out of control. And they're going to need like 36 scans to get it back under control. So a lot of Terrans, of course, have addressed this as a problem, and we've seen the Raven as a way to try and fix that. Is basically saying, look, we've got auto turret back in, the Raven's a harassment unit again, you can do some cool harassment, and then you can rotate it back around with your army and clear up creep. I think the Raven's still quite an inaccessible unit early, it's still very expensive, and whilst it's definitely good for this, and maybe all bio players should just be getting a Raven and squeezing it into their builds, maybe something else is nerfing the creep spread speed by 10% or 20% or something. You know, and you can also lower the speed at which it recedes if you want, but I feel like slowing down creep a little, maybe that changes something, maybe Roddy's vision change. Or maybe we add an extra range on the auto turret. Maybe that's like the simplest way. You say, oh, let's make the auto turret a little bit better. Because at the moment, against high level players, like I had a few weeks where I was loving Ravens against Zerg, and I don't build it anymore. Or if I do, it's later. And the reason I don't build my Raven as much anymore is because I'm playing 6k MMR plus players, and they've got a queen standing on the edge, and I get one auto turret off, they pull drones away, and if I go back in, the Raven's pretty much dead. It's probably going to die, because they'll have 2 queens on the edge. It's very hard to kind of find the angle consistently to do damage with that Raven, and it's so expensive. So often it feels like, oh cool, I did some stuff, now I cleared a bit of creep, but the Zerg's so quickly getting to 3-base saturation because you're not really doing anything that's scary. Like, it's such a controlled piece of aggression, the auto turret. So I'm curious to hear Pro's thoughts on creep and Ravens and where TVZ is right now. I kind of overall agree that the matchup's in a pretty good spot, but definitely maybe it seesaws a little bit too far in the Zerg's favor if they get enough creep out. And, you know, that's another thing where if we're talking about Terran mid-game strength, I think we have to talk about creep. And the fact that if the Terran, you know, takes a punch, a good creep spreading Zerg can explode too far out of control. So that's my thoughts. Overall, they didn't really talk too much. They just said, look, anti-armor missile is too much defensive power. I agree. It's crazy, right? It can do an insane amount of damage. The weird thing about it, and the reason I think it should be changed, is not because it's too powerful. I think it probably is too powerful, but at the moment we're seeing Zerg players play incorrectly against it. I've talked about this a lot. If you guys want to know more about it, you can ask me on my stream at another time. I don't want to go into it now. Zerg players still aren't playing that well against it. The problem is it encourages the Terran to just sit there. If you get out 3 or 4 High Templar with Storm, you can land storms and decimate an army, right? Awesome, that's cool. You get 3 or 4 Ravens, the Shredder missile is useless. The anti-armor missile does nothing. It just doesn't do enough damage, right? Yeah, I mean, you can knock armor off, and that's great if you land it in a fight, but you land 4 missiles, they're not going to kill anything. You need to get up to 10 Ravens, or 12 or 13. About 14 Ravens seems to be the magic number that Maru likes. And the thing is, to get to that amount of Ravens, for these like single, just bam, throw 20 missiles, it requires you to play an incredibly turtley style. So the way the anti-armor missile is working at the moment is encouraging a boring style. It is encouraging a sitting back behind your planetary fortresses with your ghosts, your liberators, and your ravens. And I think in terms of the interest of excitement in the games, and also excitement for watching the games, it's something which should be reworked. So that's my thoughts on Zerg vs Terran. Let's go down to what they said about PvT, guys. I'll try to be quick so we don't have this video being like 40 minutes of me just blabbering. PvT. While Maru has shown some strong victories recently, a single player's performance isn't always indicative of long-term balance. Sorry, I just like this going. They're like, guys, I know Maru is killing the Protoss really hard, but like, it's just Maru doing it, guys. Take a deep breath. Take a deep breath. The general issue here seems to be that Terran mid-game offensive options aren't as threatening as they've been in the past. This, in turn, makes the Protoss late game stronger. I actually haven't watched any of Maru's PvT recently. So this makes Protoss late game stronger as they can spend more of their resources and time teching up or expanding early instead of having to trade units with the Terran and, get stuck in the mid-game. A lot of Protoss players used to get stuck in a more extended mid-game, whereas now often the Terran feels like they slip up and then bam, there's Colossi and Storm. But it's what we've gleaned. This isn't to say that the matchup is unwinnable for Terran. Okay, so they're actually... Wait, was Maru losing against Protoss? You guys can let me know if he was losing against Protoss as well, because the way they said that made it sound like... Yeah. Okay, so basically they're saying, look, Maru's winning, but a lot of other Terrans are losing. That's what they're trying to say. Look, this isn't to say the matchup is unwinnable, but it's what we've gleaned from current trends. Our thinking right now is that we should look into ways of improving Terran's offensive options to provide them with greater control over the mid-game, such as Viking and Liberator buffs, rather than solely bolster their late-game power, such as battlecruisers. In line with our reasoning on TVZ mid-game detailed above, we currently observe the Terrans feel that their mid-game is unreliable. This makes their late-game weaker as well, since transitioning to it is difficult. We think that a Terran could use more help in TVP rather than Terran vs Zerg, and since PvZ is developing in a positive direction, we have to be careful with our changes. Okay, very non-committal. So they're touching on things, they're saying we want to focus on the mid-game once again. We want to give Terran mid-game buffs, which I think is the right way. I think Terran is the most exciting when it's played as a mid-game race in StarCraft 2, since Wings of Liberty, since forever. It's fun to have the rare late-game Ghost Lib or Ghost Raven game, but it's only fun because it's a unique diamond in the rough, right? I'd much rather most games be very mobile, aggression, mid-game focused. For me, that's always been big. What about the Marauder buff? Good call from J-Rich. This is a big one. What about the Marauder buff? I think DeMuslim was tweeting about it the other day. It might have been someone else. I think it was DeMuslim. So for you guys who don't know, what happened to the Marauder in Legacy of the Void is its attacks were split. What that means is it now gets double armor modifiers. So if your opponent gets ahead in upgrades, ooh, when does that happen? Protoss vs Terran all the time. They get up an armor upgrade, it confounds everything. Because in Protoss vs Terran, Terran relies on Marauders. Because Marines die to Colossi, they die to Adepts, they die to Storm. This is why you go triple tech lab, double reactor on your first 5 barracks. You're a very Marauder heavy composition against Protoss. The problem players are facing is it's like, cool, we're going Marauder heavy. Oh, his Zealots have +2 armor and a Guardian Shield on them. My Marauders aren't doing damage. Because the Guardian Shield fucking doubles up. It's not -2 damage, it's -4 because the Marauder's attack shoots twice. The extra armor upgrade is not -1 damage, it's -2 because the Marauder gets the double modifier. So you're often fighting these battles on +1 attack against +2 armor, and it's an absolute nightmare for Terran players. And I really think we can't look past that Marauder buff. And the scary thing is obviously it's a big one. It will make Marauders a lot stronger if you revert that. But I think it's okay. I think that's totally fine. I don't think anyone's sitting here saying Marauders are you know, gonna absolutely break the game. So I think that's a pretty targeted change for Protoss vs Terran especially. I would love to at least see that on the balanced test map, if not just put straight into the game. Maybe I'm not thinking through the whole scenario. Shout out your counterpoints. How could that break the matchup? How could that ruin everything? I mean, one problem is that Colossi suck against Marauders right now. They suck against Marauders. You're relying on your other units to kill them. So if the Marauders suddenly also do more damage versus Stalkers and Colossi, and the Terran's good at like flanking and focus firing, like it's gonna be a little bit nasty. And especially if the Terran is a Maru-style multi-pronged dropper, where rather than fighting you front on, he's forcing skirmishes where you don't have Guardian Shield, where you're fighting with just a few Stalkers and Adepts, and those Marauders are able to focus fire the Stalkers. The Stalkers are gonna die a lot quicker. So this is an interesting one. I think Marauders, definitely something which I find probably a little bit more interesting than like a Liberator buff. Like how do you buff a Liberator without screwing the game? I think the Liberator is already a controversial unit. It's very, very powerful. It's a little bit immobile, but it needs to be immobile because it's too strong as an artillery unit in the fight, as a harassment unit. If you don't make it like an awkward siege unit, it's just gonna wreck stuff. So I kind of feel like the Marauder buff might be the place to touch on here. It's something that's been talked about before. I'm also a big fan of the Widowmine. I've been talking to this a little bit. I've been kind of, talking to some people at Blizzard and elsewhere, different pros, and I think the Widowmine change to try and slow down the Protoss early game is also a nice one. Gives a bit more variety to Terran openers, and variety in Terran openers is often where they keep their opponent off balance. They force the Protosses to go into a more kind of stationary, I need to get detection, I need to do this. So Widowmine and Marauders, 2 units which should probably be touched on. in my opinion. Let's look at the final notes, guys, and finish up this video. We're not seeing any immediately or any questions, guys. Use the AdX5Pig tag and repost them. I haven't really been reading chat, and I'll talk about those very quickly. We're not seeing any immediately worrying trends in PvP and ZvZ, but in TvT late game, the Raven stalls have been noted. We haven't seen any GSL or WCS Premier level as of yet, so we'll wait and see. As always, thank you for your continued feedback. Let us know what you think. We're curious to know if you believe that the current matchups are playing out differently than what we noted here. Yeah, I haven't had any or very few late game Raven games, and it's only against these guys that like I've only had it against Riddler and Avillo, and I've actually had so much fun in those late game Raven games because I just nuke everywhere and I just like spam the Shredder missiles myself, and I friggin' love those late games because they're just this weird thing that happens once in a while, and I actually get to nuke people, which is hilarious and amazing. If it becomes really common though, yeah, like every TvT is on backwater and you're both just turtling to Ravens, it's like, oh, this is a problem. So, what about reverting the last Colossi nerf? If you buff the Marauder, says Gingivitis. Well, it wasn't a Colossi nerf, Gingivitis. It was a Colossi design change. It made the Colossi do a lot more damage to Marines and light units, so it shreds Marines, Zerglings, Hydras. Does a lot worse versus Roaches and Marauders. So it tried to give the Colossi a tighter role within the Protoss composition. So just remember, it wasn't really a nerf. It was a nerf against Marauders and Roaches. It was a buff against the other units. It just made it like more of a tight role. If there's a different nerf, let me know about it. And I think that one also lined up with them adding 1 base range to the Colossi, which made it stronger before the range upgrade kicks in. So I think many would argue it was a buff, even though it is obviously worse versus Marauders. Could they revert that? I don't think so. I don't think they would need to. Like I said, like maybe it would be a problem, this Marauder change, but I think you could test it a bunch, and it would be okay. I don't want Terran just making Marauders to counter Ultras again, says Papa Rock. So, okay, that's a big impact. That's a big impact with TVZ, right? If you change the Marauder, suddenly the Marauder's not having double -8 armor modifiers on its attack from the Ultras. It's only having a single 8 armor. That's a huge, huge buff for Marauders against Ultras. Ultras are still a scary unit, I think. Definitely it reduces how scary they are. It makes Ultras less of a turnaround unit, though. How often do we see Terran looks like they're in a good spot, looks like they're in a good spot for Ultras with Chitinous Plating come in, and the Terran just gets wrecked? I think I'd be willing to test it and kind of see what goes on. To kind of see how it goes. But you've got a good point. Definitely something that needs to be considered. Angry Healer says, okay, so back to creep. What if the vision around a tumor were based on how close tumors are to each other? So if you want lots of creep spread, you spread faster, but if you want map hack like vision, you spread slow. I think that's way too complicated and convoluted, Angry Healer. Like, I think that's like a weird... Like, you're always going to want to spread it faster because the movement boost is more important, especially at high level. Like, you're not going to... The thing is, like, why would you spend your APM spreading your creep slow when you can just spread Zergling Scouts or, like, Changelings, like, Overlords, Overseers all over instead? You'd be better off spending your APM on that and having more creep spread. So I don't like that idea, personally, but I could maybe use some more exploring. Bring in the Goliath, says Blunt Reality. Totally random comment. This is a favorite pastime of StarCraft fans. Whenever we talk about balance, people are like, why don't you just bring in the Reaver? Why don't you just bring in the Goliath or the Vulture? And I'm like, what? What's that gonna solve? I don't understand, Blunt Reality. Please, actually let me know. I'm curious. Like, what do you think that would solve? Like, because I don't think that would help against Protoss. I don't think so. Goliath's pretty trash against ground units. Can you explain why it's bad or good to be a Zealot, to do a Zealot Stalker rush with 2 bases and 2 damage upgrades? No. Okay, we're talking about balance right now. Save those questions for later. Sorry, dude. I want to finish this video first. If you could... Okay, nope, people are just asking random strategy questions now. Don't think anyone else posted it. Jaden said TVZ equals longer creep cooldown. No changes to queen spread, just self-propagation. Wait, you mean it automatically spreads, but it takes a lot longer, Jaden? Is that what you're saying? That's like auto-spreading creep I don't really like the idea of. Because I like things where, like, even at pro level, creep is one of the things where the player has to put a lot of APM into creep spread. So they can't, like, Life was notorious for not spreading creep tumors for minutes at a time because he would be so aggressively focused. And that's something, like, you have to pay for that. If you're focusing that much on aggression, you have to pay for it by your creep spread being shit. That's usually the goal. And when you have a god like Sue or someone who's mechanically amazing and kind of does both, you're like, wow, that's, you know, it's like this beautiful, skillful thing. So I don't like the idea of self-spreading creep because I think at the pro level, it's just so exciting to watch. And even if you just spread your creep once in a while at low level, like it's still very helpful mechanic. TVP, concussive shells stopping Stalker Blink or putting it on cooldown, says Jaden. Oh, that's a cute idea. So if your Marauders shoots a Stalker, it can't blink. Stops Protoss baiting, stim, and shaving off bio for free. I like that mechanic though, Jaden, because once again, that's a situation where that costs the Protoss investing in a lot of Stalkers early, which are very bad in frontal engagement. Stalkers suck balls for their cost in terms of damage. You've got to get an expensive upgrade. Whilst it's frustrating as a Protoss, as a Terran player, remember, you lose a Marauder, you lose a Marine, you got to stim a few units. They had to invest a lot of money to do that and a lot of APM and skill to get that free damage. So I don't think that's free damage. I think that's totally fair. I don't particularly like that change, but I like the creativity of the suggestion. No, the tumor cooldown is automated, says Jaden. I don't know. It increases the tumor cooldown. But is it still... Okay, so you're just saying just increase the tumor cooldown a little bit. But it spreads faster. Oh, yeah, you could potentially do that. Potentially. That might be something. All right, last questions. Should creep vision go off of the placement of the tumor or the creep in general? Placement of the tumor is how it currently goes, Agi, and I think it should continue doing that. But I don't mind Roddy's vision idea of just reduce that vision to next to nothing, or don't, yeah, like, and make it so you can just spread creep even through the fog, basically. That would be cool. I like that idea. I think that would be really cool. Yeah, we're going to put this on YouTube, guys. Thanks for watching. If you're watching on YouTube, hopefully you enjoyed. We'll try and address this again when we get some more posts from Blizzard. Thanks for watching, dudes. All right, so that's going to be the end of that little video there, just kind of talking about the change.